The Utah Territory stretched endlessly in all directions from Marcus Whitmore's modest ranch, a vast canvas of red rock formations, sagebrush, and endless sky that could make a man feel both infinite and utterly alone. Marcus had chosen this isolation deliberately after the war, seeking a place where the ghosts of Gettysburg and Antietam couldn't follow him. At 42, he was a tall, lean man with graying hair and eyes the color of winter sky. His hands bore the calluses of honest work, and his face carried the weathered lines of someone who'd spent years under the harsh Utah sun. He spoke little, worked hard, and asked nothing from the world except to be left in peace with his cattle, his books, and his memories. The storm had been building all afternoon, dark clouds gathering over the Wasatch Mountains like an army preparing for battle. Marcus finished his evening chores quickly, securing his animals and battening down anything that might blow away. Utah storms could be vicious, and this one promised to be particularly severe. The first drops of rain began falling just as he reached his cabin porch. Within minutes, the drops became a torrent, and the wind howled across the valley with supernatural fury. Marcus settled into his chair by the fire with a cup of coffee and a worn copy of Emerson's essays, grateful for the solid walls between him and the tempest outside. The storm raged for hours. Thunder shook the cabin's foundation, and lightning illuminated the landscape in stark, otherworldly flashes. Marcus had seen worse weather during his years in this territory, but something about tonight felt different, more primal, more dangerous. It was near midnight when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A cry, high-pitched and desperate, barely audible over the wind, but unmistakably human. Marcus set down his book and listened intently. There it was again, closer this time. Someone was out there in this hell of wind and rain. Marcus grabbed his heavy coat and lantern, steeling himself against the storm's fury. The moment he opened the door, the wind nearly knocked him backward, and the rain struck his face like needles. He stepped into the chaos, holding his lantern high and calling out over the wind. "Hello, where are you?" Another cry answered him, weaker now and coming from the direction of his barn. Marcus fought his way through the storm, his lantern casting wild shadows that danced with each lightning flash. Near the corner of the barn, he found her. She was just a child, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, huddled against the wooden wall in a futile attempt to find shelter. Her long black hair was plastered to her head by the rain, and her simple doeskin dress offered little protection against the elements. She looked up at Marcus with dark eyes that held fear, but also a fierce dignity that seemed far beyond her years. "Hey there, little one," Marcus said gently, crouching down despite the rain pounding on his back. "You can't stay out here. Come on." The child didn't speak, but when Marcus extended his hand, she took it without hesitation. She was shivering violently, her small body racked with cold, but she walked beside him steadily as he led her through the storm to his cabin. Inside, the warmth and light seemed to overwhelm her for a moment. She stood dripping on his wooden floor, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with cautious curiosity. Marcus quickly built up the fire and brought blankets from his bedroom. "Let's get you warmed up," he said, wrapping the blankets around her small shoulders. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head but didn't speak. Marcus noticed she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to follow her inside. "Are you alone out there?" Marcus asked gently. This time she nodded, her dark eyes meeting his with a solemnity that made his heart ache. What was a child doing alone in this wilderness during such a storm? Marcus heated milk on his stove and added honey, offering the warm drink to his unexpected guest. She accepted it gratefully, her small hands wrapping around the cup as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "My name is Marcus," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "What's your name?" For a long moment she didn't respond. Then in a voice barely above a whisper she said, "Ayanna." "Ayanna," Marcus repeated, trying to pronounce it correctly. "That's a beautiful name. Are you from one of the local tribes?" She nodded again, then surprised him by speaking in careful English. "Ute, my people. Camp far from here. I was lost." Her English was accented but clear, suggesting she'd had some contact with white settlers before. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and concern. Relief that she could communicate with him. Concern about how she'd become separated from her family in such dangerous weather. "Well, Ayanna, you're safe now," Marcus said firmly. "We'll figure out how to get you back to your people when the storm passes." The child's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly. "Thank you," she whispered. As the storm continued to rage outside, Marcus made up a bed for Ayanna on his sofa, piling it high with blankets and pillows. She curled up like a small animal seeking warmth, and within minutes exhaustion claimed her. Marcus sat by the fire, watching the child sleep and wondering what tomorrow would bring. He'd heard stories about tensions between white settlers and the local Ute tribes, but he'd always kept to himself and avoided conflicts. Now, with this child under his roof, he realized he might be walking into complications he'd never intended. But looking at Ayanna's peaceful face in the firelight, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose beyond his own survival. This child had needed help, and he'd provided it. Whatever consequences that brought, he would face them. Outside, the storm continued its fury, but inside the cabin, two unlikely souls had found shelter together. A lonely man haunted by war and a lost child far from home. Neither of them knew that by morning everything would change. As Marcus finally dozed in his chair, keeping watch over his unexpected guest, the storm began to show signs of weakening. But in the darkness beyond his windows, other eyes were watching, and other minds were calculating the significance of what had transpired this night. The gesture of kindness that seemed so simple would soon reveal its true complexity, and Marcus Whitmore would learn that in this vast territory, no act of compassion goes unnoticed, especially when it crosses the ancient boundaries between two very different worlds. Marcus woke to silence. After hours of howling wind and driving rain, the sudden quiet felt almost unnatural. Gray dawn light filtered through his windows, and the storm's fury had given way to an eerie calm that seemed to press against the cabin walls. Ayanna was still asleep on the sofa, curled beneath the blankets with only her dark hair visible. She looked so small and vulnerable in the morning light that Marcus felt a protective instinct he hadn't experienced since the war. He moved quietly around the cabin, stoking the fire and preparing coffee, trying not to wake her. It was when he went to check on his animals that Marcus discovered he was no longer alone on his property. They stood in perfect formation around his cabin, dozens of Ute warriors, so still and silent they might have been carved from the red rocks themselves, men, women, and elders, all dressed in traditional clothing and decorated with the symbols of their clan. Their faces were painted for ceremony, and feathers adorned their hair. Each warrior held weapons, bows, lances, war clubs, but they held them in positions of readiness rather than direct threat. Marcus stopped in his doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd fought in the Civil War, had faced Confederate charges and artillery barrages, but something about this silent assembly was more unnerving than any battlefield he'd ever seen. An elderly man stepped forward from the group. He was tall and dignified, with silver hair braided with feathers and bone ornaments. His face was weathered like old leather, but his dark eyes held intelligence and unmistakable authority. This was clearly a chief or elder of significant importance. "You are the one who sheltered our daughter," the elder said in careful English, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. Marcus nodded slowly, his hand instinctively moving to rest near his rifle, though he realized immediately that any aggressive action would be suicide. "Yes, I found her in the storm. She needed help. I am Chief Running Bear of the Winta Ute," the elder continued. "The child you protected is Ayanna, granddaughter of my sister, daughter of our war chief. She is precious to our people." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. He'd sheltered not just any child, but the granddaughter of a chief, the daughter of a war leader. The implications crashed over him like an avalanche. "She was alone and frightened," Marcus said carefully. "I couldn't leave a child out in that storm." Chief Running Bear studied Marcus for a long moment, his gaze seeming to peer into the white man's soul. "This we know. Our scouts followed her trail to your door. They watched through the night, saw how you cared for her. You gave shelter, warmth, food. You asked for nothing in return. Any decent person would have done the same, would they?" The chief's question hung in the air like smoke. "In the past year, 3 of our children have sought help from white settlers. 2 were turned away to die in the cold. 1 was enslaved and beaten. You are the first to show kindness without expecting payment or advantage." Marcus felt sick thinking about children being refused help or harmed. "I'm sorry to hear that. Not all white men are the same, just as I'm sure not all your people are the same." Chief Running Bear looked surprised by her request, then thoughtful. "The decision is not mine alone to make. Her parents must agree. And the tribal council must approve such an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect his quiet life was about to become much more complicated. A cultural exchange, Chief Running Bear explained. Ayanna would spend part of each season here, learning the ways of white farming and ranching while teaching you about our customs and language. Joseph would ensure her safety and serve as liaison between our peoples. Marcus looked down at Ayanna, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. The idea of having people around his ranch again, of purpose beyond mere survival, stirred something in his chest that had been dormant for years. If her parents agree, and if the tribal council approves, Marcus said slowly, I would be honored to participate in such an exchange. Ayanna's face lit up with joy, and Chief Running Bear nodded with satisfaction. Then we will convene the council and seek their wisdom. For now, we will make camp near your property to ensure your safety, while arrangements are made. As the chief turned to address his people in their native language, Marcus realized that his life had just taken a turn he never could have anticipated. The storm had brought him more than just a child to shelter. It had brought him a connection to a world he'd never imagined entering. Looking at the dozens of Ute warriors now beginning to set up a protective camp around his ranch, Marcus Whitmore understood that his days of solitude were over. Whether that was a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The lonely rancher who had gone to sleep last night was gone forever. In his place stood a man with responsibilities, connections, and the beginning of a purpose he'd thought lost forever in the smoke and blood of distant battlefields. 3 days after the storm, Marcus's ranch had been transformed into something resembling a frontier diplomatic outpost. The Ute Council had convened under a large canvas shelter erected near his barn, while Joseph Crow Feather had set up a smaller lodge nearby. Ayanna moved between the Indian camp and Marcus's cabin. With the easy confidence of someone equally at home in both worlds, Marcus found himself in the strange position of hosting negotiations about his own future while trying to maintain his daily ranch operations. The cattle still needed tending, the fences still required mending, and the hay wouldn't cut itself. But now every task was observed by curious Ute eyes and occasionally assisted by willing hands. Your fence-making technique is inefficient, Joseph Crow Feather observed in perfect English as Marcus struggled with a particularly stubborn post. Joseph was a man in his 30s, shorter than Marcus but powerfully built, with intelligent eyes and an easy smile that made conversation comfortable, despite the cultural differences. I'm open to suggestions, Marcus replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. Joseph demonstrated a technique involving twisted rawhide and strategic bracing that made the fence stronger and required fewer materials. My father learned this from Mexican vaqueros before the territory became American. Sometimes the old ways and new ways can work together. Like what we're trying to do here? Marcus asked. Exactly like what we're trying to do here, Joseph confirmed, though it won't be easy. There are people on both sides who believe mixing our ways will weaken both cultures. Marcus had already heard rumors from the nearest settlement about his Indian troubles. A messenger from the territorial government had arrived that morning with polite but pointed questions about the Ute presence on his property. And what do you believe? Marcus asked. Joseph was quiet for a moment, testing the strength of the fence repair. I believe that survival requires adaptation. The world is changing whether we like it or not. Those who learn to build bridges will prosper. Those who only build walls will be buried beneath them. That evening, Chief Running Bear requested a formal meeting with Marcus in his cabin. The elder arrived with 2 other tribal leaders, a woman Marcus had learned was Ayanna's grandmother, and Joseph as translator. The council has reached a decision, Chief Running Bear announced. But first, we must understand your intentions. Why do you truly want to participate in this arrangement? What do you hope to gain? Marcus had spent 3 days considering that exact question. Honestly, I've been alone for too long. The war, it left me feeling disconnected from the world, from other people. Helping Ayanna reminded me that I'm capable of more than just surviving. If I can learn to understand your people while helping her learn about ranching, maybe we can all become stronger. Ayanna's grandmother, a dignified woman named Evening Star, spoke in Ute, and Joseph translated. She says you speak with sincerity, but she worries about the practical dangers. White settlers who befriend Indians often face hostility from their own people. Are you prepared for that? I've faced hostility before, Marcus replied, and I'd rather face it for doing something right than avoid it by doing nothing at all. Chief Running Bear smiled approvingly. The council has decided to approve the arrangement, but with conditions. Ayana will spend 2 months here during spring and summer, learning your methods of animal husbandry and agriculture. Joseph will remain as her guardian and as teacher for you. In return, you will learn our language, our customs, and our methods of living in harmony with this land. What about the territorial authorities? Marcus asked. They're already asking questions about why I'm harboring Indians. Let them ask, Evening Star said in careful English. We have treaties that guarantee our right to travel and trade. You have committed no crime by offering hospitality, but they might make trouble for you personally, Joseph added. Some white officials don't distinguish between legal cooperation and illegal activity when it comes to Indian relations. Marcus had already considered this possibility. Then I'll have to make it clear that this arrangement benefits everyone involved. If I can improve my ranch operations while promoting peaceful relations between our peoples, even skeptical officials should see the value. Over the following weeks, Marcus began his education in Ute culture and language. He learned that Ayana's name meant eternal blossom, and that her gift for reading people's hearts was considered a sacred ability among her people. He discovered that the Ute had sophisticated methods of land management that maximized natural resources without depleting them. Your people fence the land to control the animals, Joseph explained as they rode the boundaries of Marcus's property. We control ourselves to work with the land's natural patterns. Both methods can be effective, but understanding both makes you more adaptable. Ayana proved to be an enthusiastic student of ranching techniques. She learned to milk cows, gather eggs, and identify signs of illness in livestock with remarkable speed. Her natural empathy with animals made her particularly effective at calming nervous cattle and horses. She has the touch, Marcus told Joseph one evening as they watched Ayana gently coax a skittish mare to accept a halter. Animals trust her instinctively. It's the same gift that led her to your cabin during the storm, Joseph replied. She senses what others need, whether they're animals or people. The first real test of their arrangement came when a delegation of white ranchers arrived at Marcus's property, led by a stern man named Harrison Webb, who owned the largest spread in the territory. Whitmore, we need to talk, Webb announced without preamble. There are rumors you're harboring hostile Indians on your property. I'm participating in a cultural exchange approved by the tribal council and the territorial authorities, Marcus replied calmly. The Ute people here are peaceful and helpful. That's not the point, Webb shot back. You're setting a dangerous precedent. If every rancher starts making deals with Indians, it undermines the authority of the territorial government. Joseph stepped forward, his bearing dignified and non-threatening. Mr. Webb, I am Joseph Crow Feather, appointed by Chief Running Bear to serve as liaison. We seek only friendship and mutual benefit. Mr. Whitmore's ranch has improved significantly since our arrangement began. Webb looked skeptical. Improved how? Marcus had anticipated this question. Over the past month, using techniques learned from Joseph and Ayana, he'd increased his cattle's weight gain, improved his water management, and reduced losses from predators and disease. The numbers were undeniable. My herd is healthier, my pastures are more productive, and my operating costs have decreased, Marcus explained, showing Webb his carefully maintained records. The Ute have knowledge about managing this land that took generations to develop. I'd be foolish not to learn from it. Webb examined the figures with growing surprise. These improvements, they're real? Completely real. And reproducible. Joseph has offered to teach similar techniques to any rancher interested in learning. The offer caught Webb off guard. He'd teach other white ranchers these methods? Knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied, Joseph said simply. Strong ranchers make strong neighbors. Strong neighbors make peaceful territory. Webb left with his delegation, but Marcus could see the businessman's mind working. The potential for improved profits was something any rancher could understand, regardless of cultural prejudices. That evening, as they sat around Marcus's fireplace, Ayana asked a question that surprised him. Are you lonely anymore? Marcus considered the question seriously. His cabin was filled with voices. His days were busy with shared work, and his evenings were spent learning new languages and customs. The crushing solitude that had driven him to this isolated ranch had lifted without his even noticing. No, he said honestly. I'm not lonely anymore. Are you happy here? Ayana smiled, the expression transforming her serious face. Yes, I learn much and I help much. And I think maybe the spirits were right about the vision. What vision? Marcus asked. Joseph translated as Ayana spoke in Ute, then explained. She says she dreamed about a warrior who had forgotten how to protect others, who needed to remember that strength comes from connection, not isolation. She believes the storm brought her to you so you could both remember your purposes. Marcus felt a deep warmth spread through his chest. The child's wisdom was profound in its simplicity. He had forgotten his purpose in his isolation, had lost sight of what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. I think she might be right, Marcus said softly. I think we were both meant to be here. As the fire crackled and the Utah stars shone through his windows, Marcus Whitmore realized that the storm had brought him more than just a child to shelter. It had brought him back to life, back to purpose, and back to the understanding that the strongest bridges are built not with wood and stone, but with trust, respect, and the courage to reach across the spaces that seem to divide us. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons and new opportunities to prove that two very different worlds could work together, and for the first time in years, Marcus was looking forward to tomorrow. 2 months into the arrangement, Marcus had settled into a rhythm unlike anything he'd ever experienced. His mornings began with Ayana teaching him Ute phrases while she gathered eggs. Afternoons were spent learning traditional land management techniques from Joseph, and evenings found all three of them working together to improve the ranch operations using a blend of both cultures' knowledge. The transformation in Marcus's property was remarkable. His cattle were thriving, his water sources were more efficiently managed, and he'd implemented crop rotation methods that the Ute had developed over centuries. Word was spreading throughout the territory about the success of the unusual partnership. It was a success that was about to be tested in ways none of them anticipated. The trouble began when a band of Shoshone warriors appeared on the northern ridge overlooking Marcus's ranch. Unlike the peaceful Ute presence, these men carried themselves with obvious hostility, and their war paint suggested they weren't interested in friendly conversation. They're not here for us, Joseph said grimly, as he studied the distant figures through Marcus's field glasses. But they're not here for peace either. What do they want? Marcus asked. Probably to test the strength of the alliance between the Ute and the white rancher, Joseph replied. Some Shoshone bands believe that cooperation with whites weakens Indian resolve. They see our arrangement as betrayal. Ayana, who had been quietly observing the distant warriors, spoke urgently in Ute. Joseph's expression grew more serious as he listened. What did she say? Marcus asked. She recognizes their leader, a war chief named Black Wolf who's been raiding white settlements and Ute camps alike. He believes the only solution to white expansion is total war. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The peaceful world they'd been building suddenly seemed very fragile. What do they want with us specifically? They want to prove that whites cannot be trusted, that they'll abandon their Indian allies at the first sign of real danger, Joseph explained. Black Wolf will try to force you to choose between your safety and ours. As if summoned by their conversation, the Shoshone warriors began riding down from the ridge toward the ranch. Marcus counted 12 men, all armed and moving with the coordinated purpose of experienced fighters. What should we do? Marcus asked. Joseph was already moving toward his weapons. We prepare to defend ourselves. But Marcus, you should know. If shooting starts, some people will blame you for bringing Indian troubles to the territory. Your cooperation with us will be seen as the cause of any violence. Marcus grabbed his rifle and checked his ammunition. Let them blame me. I won't abandon my friends to save my reputation. The Shoshone warriors stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, close enough to talk but far enough to have room to maneuver if fighting broke out. Black Wolf, a fierce-looking man with scars across his cheek and eagle feathers in his hair, rode forward alone. White man, he called out in accented English. You harbor enemies of the Shoshone people. Send them out and you will not be harmed. Marcus stepped onto his porch, rifle held ready but not directly threatening. These people are my guests and friends. They've done no harm to anyone. They betray their own kind by serving white interests, Black Wolf replied. The Ute have forgotten that whites are destroyers, not partners. We come to remind them. Joseph appeared at Marcus's side, speaking calmly in what Marcus recognized as Shoshone language. Black Wolf's response was sharp and angry, but Joseph continued speaking with patient determination. "What are you telling him?" Marcus asked quietly. "I'm explaining that cooperation doesn't mean surrender, that learning from each other makes both people stronger," Joseph replied, but he's not interested in dialogue. Black Wolf suddenly raised his lance and pointed it directly at Marcus. "White man, you have 1 hour to decide. Send out the traitors or we will take them by force. Choose wisely. Your life and ranch against theirs." With that ultimatum, Black Wolf wheeled his horse and rode back to his warriors, who began spreading out in a loose circle around the ranch buildings. They were clearly preparing for either an assault or a siege. "They're serious," Marcus observed. "Very serious," Joseph confirmed. Black Wolf has been building a coalition of warriors who believe peaceful coexistence is impossible. Destroying our arrangement would strengthen his position significantly. Ayanna tugged at Marcus's sleeve and spoke rapidly in Ute. Joseph translated. "She says there's another way. She wants to speak with Black Wolf herself." "Absolutely not," Marcus said immediately. "I won't let a child walk into danger." "She's not just any child," Joseph reminded him. "Among our people, she has the authority of a vision keeper. Even hostile tribes respect that gift. What's she proposing?" Joseph listened as Ayanna explained her plan, his expression growing thoughtful. "She wants to offer herself as hostage to guarantee that we're not using you for military intelligence or planning attacks on other tribes. She believes Black Wolf will accept her word because of her gift for seeing truth." "That's insane," Marcus protested. "I won't let her sacrifice herself for us." "She wouldn't be sacrificing herself," Joseph explained. "She'd be guaranteeing our peaceful intentions. If Black Wolf accepts her testimony, he has no justification for attacking us." Marcus looked down at Ayanna, whose dark eyes held the same determination he'd seen the night he found her in the storm. This child had an inner strength that consistently surprised him. "It's too dangerous," Marcus said finally. Ayanna spoke again, and this time her tone was firm and clear. Joseph translated with obvious reluctance. "She says that preventing war is worth any personal risk. She says that if violence starts here, it will spread throughout the territory and many innocent people will die." Marcus felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The child was probably right. Violence here would likely trigger broader conflicts between whites and Indians throughout Utah territory. But asking a 9-year-old girl to walk into a potentially deadly situation violated every protective instinct he possessed. "There has to be another way," Marcus said. "Maybe there is," Joseph said thoughtfully. "What if all three of us go together? You as the rancher, me as the Ute representative, and Ayanna as the truth keeper. We present ourselves as a unified alliance that cannot be broken by threats. That's even more dangerous. Or it's the only way to prove that our cooperation is genuine and unshakable," Joseph countered. "Black Wolf is testing whether whites abandon Indians when threatened. If you stand with us publicly, even in danger, it undermines his entire argument." Marcus studied the Shoshone warriors, who were clearly growing more restless as the hour deadline approached. Some were already checking their weapons and positioning themselves for an attack. "If we do this," Marcus said slowly, "we go as equals. No one sacrifices themselves for the others. We stand together or we fall together." "Agreed," Joseph said firmly. Ayanna nodded with serious dignity. "Together," she said in careful English. As they walked across the open ground toward Black Wolf's position, Marcus felt the same mixture of fear and determination he'd experienced charging Confederate lines during the war. But this felt different, more important somehow. This wasn't about territory or politics. This was about proving that people from different worlds could trust each other enough to face danger together. Black Wolf watched their approach with obvious surprise. He'd clearly expected either surrender or defiance, not this united front walking calmly toward almost certain violence. "You choose to die together?" Black Wolf asked when they stopped within speaking distance. "We choose to live together," Marcus replied firmly. "These people are part of my family now. Threatening them is the same as threatening me." Ayanna stepped forward and began speaking in Shoshone, her young voice carrying across the tense silence with remarkable authority. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the power and conviction in her tone. Black Wolf's expression changed as he listened, his hostility gradually giving way to curiosity and then something approaching respect. When Ayanna finished speaking, the war chief was quiet for a long moment. "What did she say?" Marcus asked Joseph quietly. She told him about her vision, about finding a warrior who had lost his way and needed to remember the importance of protecting others. She said that cooperation doesn't weaken either culture. It creates something new and stronger than either could be alone. Black Wolf finally spoke, his voice thoughtful rather than hostile. Joseph translated. "He says the child speaks with wisdom beyond her years. He says he sees truth in her eyes and strength in your willingness to stand with your Indian friends against danger." "Does that mean he'll leave us in peace?" Marcus asked. Joseph spoke with Black Wolf for several more minutes, their conversation growing more cordial as it continued. Finally, Joseph turned to Marcus with relief evident on his face. "He's withdrawing his warriors. He says that Ayanna's vision has shown him something he didn't expect to see. Genuine courage and loyalty between white and Indian people. He cannot attack an alliance that demonstrates such honor." Black Wolf approached Marcus directly, extending his hand in the universal gesture of respect. "White Rancher, you have proven that some whites understand the meaning of loyalty. We will not forget this." As the Shoshone warriors rode away, Marcus felt his knees almost buckle with relief. Ayanna took his hand, squeezing it gently, while Joseph clasped his shoulder with obvious pride. "You realize what just happened?" Joseph asked as they walked back toward the cabin. "You didn't just save our lives. You probably prevented a war that could have spread across the entire territory." Marcus looked down at Ayanna, whose wisdom had once again shown them a path through seemingly impossible circumstances. "I think we all prevented it together, and I think we've proven something important about what's possible when people trust each other." That evening, as they sat around the fireplace, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since the night of the storm. He'd started as a lonely man seeking only isolation, but he'd discovered that his greatest strength came from connection, protection, and the courage to stand with those he cared about. The test of trust had revealed that the bridges they'd been building were stronger than any of them had realized. And tomorrow, they would continue the work of proving that different worlds could not only coexist, but create something beautiful together. 6 months after the storm, Marcus's ranch had become something unprecedented in Utah territory, a place where two cultures met, learned from each other, and created something neither could have achieved alone. Word of their success had spread far beyond the local area, attracting visitors from across the West who wanted to see the impossible partnership for themselves. "The territorial governor wants to meet with you," Joseph announced, reading from an official letter that had arrived that morning. "He's coming here personally to observe our experimental cooperation and determine whether it should serve as a model for other settlements." Marcus looked up from the fence he was mending alongside Ayanna, who had become remarkably skilled at ranch work while maintaining her connection to Ute traditions. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we're no longer just 3 people working together," Joseph replied. "We've become a symbol of what's possible between Indians and whites. That brings opportunities but also responsibilities." The transformation in Marcus himself was as remarkable as the changes to his ranch. The isolated, grief-stricken veteran who had sought only solitude had evolved into a confident leader, comfortable navigating between 2 worlds and serving as a bridge for others attempting similar cooperation. "Are you ready for that kind of attention?" Joseph asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, he would have fled from such scrutiny. Now, surrounded by the evidence of what they'd accomplished together, he felt a different kind of readiness. "If it helps other people build bridges instead of walls, then yes, I'm ready," Marcus said, "but only if we do it together as equals." Ayanna spoke in Ute and Joseph translated with a smile. "She says the spirits told her this would happen. She says our arrangement was always meant to be bigger than just us." The territorial governor arrived 3 days later with a small entourage that included military officers, territorial officials, and several influential ranchers from throughout the region. Governor Samuel Crawford was a pragmatic man who had built his political career on finding practical solutions to complex problems. "Mr. Whitmore," Governor Crawford said as he surveyed the thriving ranch operation, "the reports about your partnership were impressive, but seeing it in person is quite remarkable. How do you explain this level of success?" Marcus had prepared for this moment, but he let Joseph and Ayanna stand beside him as equals during the discussion. Governor, we've succeeded because we've combined the best knowledge and techniques from both cultures. The Ute have centuries of experience managing this land sustainably. We have newer technologies and methods. Together, we're stronger than either could be alone. Governor Crawford listened as Joseph explained their water management innovations, their improved cattle breeding techniques, and their methods for preventing conflicts with wildlife. Ayanna demonstrated her remarkable ability to communicate with animals, showing how Ute spiritual practices could complement practical ranching skills. The financial results speak for themselves, Marcus continued, presenting the carefully maintained records that showed dramatic improvements in productivity and profitability. But more importantly, we've proven that cooperation between Indians and whites can benefit everyone involved. What about security concerns? Asked Colonel Matthews, the military officer accompanying the governor. How do you guarantee that this arrangement doesn't compromise territorial security? Joseph stepped forward to answer. Colonel, our arrangement has actually improved security throughout this region. We serve as intermediaries between the territorial government and local tribes, preventing misunderstandings that might lead to conflicts. Black Wolf's visit proved that even hostile groups respect our alliance. You were threatened by Shoshone warriors, Governor Crawford asked with concern. We were tested, Marcus corrected, and we passed the test by standing together. That demonstration of loyalty actually strengthened peaceful relations with all the local tribes. Governor Crawford spent 2 days observing their operation, speaking with tribal leaders who came to vouch for the arrangement, and interviewing neighboring ranchers who had begun adopting some of their techniques. His conclusions would shape territorial policy for years to come. Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Crow Feather, Miss Ayanna, the governor said formally on his final evening. I'm recommending to the territorial legislature that your partnership be officially recognized as a model for Indian-white cooperation. We want to establish similar arrangements at strategic locations throughout Utah Territory. What would that involve? Marcus asked. Financial support for expansion, official territorial protection for participants, and the establishment of a formal cultural exchange program, Governor Crawford explained. You would train other ranchers and Indian leaders in your methods, helping to create a network of cooperative settlements throughout the territory. Marcus looked at his partners, seeing excitement and determination in both their faces. The lonely rancher who had sought only isolation was being asked to help transform the entire territorial approach to Indian relations. There's one condition, Marcus said carefully. Any program we help establish must be based on genuine equality and mutual respect. We won't participate in anything that treats Indian knowledge as secondary to white methods. Agreed, Governor Crawford said immediately. Your success proves that equality produces better results than dominance. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Utah landscape in brilliant colors, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. Do you ever miss being alone? Joseph asked, noting Marcus's contemplative mood. Never, Marcus replied honestly. I thought I wanted solitude, but what I really needed was purpose. You and Ayanna gave me that. Ayanna, now speaking English with increasing confidence, added her own observation. The spirits say this is just the beginning. They say our friendship will help many people learn to see past differences to find common ground. What do the spirits say about our future? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the child's remarkable insights. Ayanna was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes reflecting the evening light. They say we will help build a new kind of family, not bound by blood or tribe, but by choice and shared values. They say this family will grow to include many people from many different worlds. Marcus felt a deep warmth in his chest as he considered her words. The family he'd lost in the war, the connections he'd thought gone forever, had been replaced by something even stronger. Bonds chosen rather than inherited, tested by adversity rather than assumed by tradition. Then we'd better get ready, Marcus said, taking Ayanna's small hand in his weathered one while Joseph clasped his shoulder. It sounds like we have a lot of work to do. As the stars appeared over the Utah Territory, 3 unlikely friends sat together planning a future that would transform not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who would learn from their example. The storm that had brought them together had indeed changed everything, not through destruction, but through the simple power of compassion, trust, and the courage to reach across the spaces that seemed to divide us.